Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO YouTube channel. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry to help foster learning, growth, and inspiration in others. Thank you all to our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So hit subscribe. It really does help others be able to discover this resource. So let's dive in. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I'd like to welcome Edmond Gauvreau, Chief Planning Branch Installation Readiness Division of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Thank you, Edmond, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Not a problem. And if you're going to say Corps of Architects, I would love you immeasurably.
I was trying not to mess it up. It's a very long role and title that you have, and make sure I don't mess it up. But for my listeners, would you mind introducing yourself and a little bit more what you do in this role?
Okay. My name is Ed Gauvreau. I am the chief of the planning branch within the Corps' Installation Readiness Division. Very simply put, most of the stuff that I do is to the far left end of the facility spectrum. That is, we do installation master planning in terms of how we develop things. We have a software package which helps develop the requirements for facilities which go into the military construction budget that goes to Congress annually. And then I also have a bunch of folks who work with various Army organizations to develop their facility requirements. And that itself is very interesting because, of course, they are constantly changing the requirements depending on what new toy or system that they come up with. And we have to figure out, A, does the existing facility accommodate it? Or B, do we have to do something new?
Now, what are all the divisions that are options?
Well, installation readiness takes care of basically a whole bunch of stuff. We do like the restoration modernization projects, which are basically renovation jobs, which is about a $7 billion program. We also do a lot of the energy initiatives. We also do some things in terms of mission assurance, which is a fancy way of basically making sure that our installations are able to be resilient in case of any disaster or occurrence. We also, this is within the Directorate of Military Programs, so we have major construction. We also have a whole environmental division, which is very active, doing both work for the Department of Defense as well as for civilian agencies. We do a lot of EPA work for them. We also have an active group which deals with other agencies and international work. We do stuff for, you name the federal agency, we're probably doing work for them at this point. But also, of course, we do overseas work. And as I like to say about where the Corps has either already been there, they are there, or they will be there.
Now, what percentage are you guys doing all in-house versus putting out for proposals?
Well, mostly, at least in terms of in-house work, we usually try to do about 20 to 25% in-house to maintain technical expertise. The rest of the design work gets contracted out to the private sector, and construction is 100% to the private sector. To give you an idea, and I just saw the number today, in FY22, we awarded $1.8 billion in architects and engineer fees.
That's crazy.
And I'm going to drop that little reminder to AIA National. So
just to let them know how much work you're doing.
Yes, and that's just the Corps of Engineers. I'm not including the Navy, the Air Force, or other DoD services in there.
Now, how did you get started working on the federal government side?
Oh, that's lots of fun. Well, came in college. I finished the last year of my degree at Notre Dame. My father is a career civil servant, and so I want to do something different. So I made a very public pronouncement. The fact is, the last place I wanted to work was for the federal government. Well, this is back in 1980. Of course, that we had a recession in terms of the building industry, and it was very difficult landing a job in the private sector. So after some time, I finally decided to, okay, we'll go through the process to try to get a job with the federal government. And a few months later, I was offered a position down at the Public Works Department at Fort Stewart, Georgia, which is just outside Savannah. So my father reminded me that of a few years ago. Just said, "What happened to that?" Well, the Army offered me a job when no one else did, and at that time, and this is 1981, mind you, $16,000 a year was a lot better than zero.
Yep.
So, but I will say, working at a military installation in their public works section, it's tremendous experience because you're not pigeonholed into just doing like drawing bathrooms or wall sections. You you get to go out and meet with clients, you come up with basic requirements, you come up with designs, you work with the other engineering disciplines because guess what? They're all sitting right next to you. So you get to learn all that, get the contract awarded, but then also construction oversight. They may not always be big, sexy projects, but the thing is, they are important to the folks, end users. And it was great experience. I will admit the fact that going from Detroit down to Savannah was a bit of a culture shock.
Very different environment. I've been to
Uh,
both.
yeah, so I was there for a couple of years. Then I got the opportunity to take a position with a Navy installation outside D.C., Patuxent Naval Air Station, which is about an hour south of Washington, doing the same sort of stuff but for a different service. Did well with there. A couple of years later, I was off. I got the chance to go back to Detroit with the Corps of Engineers for the Detroit district. But sometimes, as you know, sometimes you make a job change and you find out shortly after you get there, may not have been the best idea in the world. So I toughed it out, but then a few months later, a friend of mine back in Maryland says, "You want a promotion?" I says, "Yeah. What do I do?" so so applied and got a job up at Aberdeen Proving Ground, which is northeast of Baltimore at the north end of the Chesapeake Bay, and there, still in public works, but now mostly doing more project management. Was working with the Corps in terms of for major construction projects, and it was a great job. Had a lot of friends there. It was a great experience. But then a couple of years later, I got a chance to get a promotion and go down to D.C. to go work for the Food and Drug Administration. Believe it or not, they have a facilities section. So got to do that, and there started dealing with a nationwide area of facilities. Instead of just a local installation, now you're doing installations across the country. And so I was there for about 6 years. Interesting experience for the military. But so we were doing that. And then I then was made aware of an opportunity to go work for the Corps of Engineers in their medical facilities office. And so I go down, I interviewed, and it sounded like a great idea. And I figured, okay, well, they'll let me know in a couple weeks. Well, within 3 hours after I got back to my office, I get this phone call saying, "Ed, we're offering you the job." And I said, "Oh my God." I told them, can I get back to you tomorrow? It wasn't that I wasn't going to take the job. I was just so shocked because usually
Yeah.
government process takes a long. But my boss, Jim Allred, basically, if he saw somebody he wanted, he had the folks basically say, "Do the paperwork, get the offer in now, and get them on board." So, but I'll do the tie-in with Jim Allred later. But so I worked in medical facilities for 6 years, and that was, again, this time you're going worldwide in terms
Yeah.
of hospitals, clinics, research facilities, all around the country and overseas. It was a great experience. You got to do large projects. Very, as you know, medical is very complex and technical. Lots of people playing in the game, but it was a great experience. But then I had the interesting 6 months. It was around 2001. Jim had retired, get a new boss. They needed somebody to go down and head up a group down at our Huntsville office. And then I got volunteered. Well,
Volunteered or voluntold?
Basically voluntold. So wasn't too thrilled about that, but given the option that either take that job or you have no job, I said, okay. So we went down there. I did not move my family because at that point, it was the middle of the school year. It says, hey, my wife works for a school system. I'm not pulling my daughter out of school mid-year. We'll figure it out. Well, about 3 months later, I got a call from the Navy basically saying, hey, we need an architect. I said, you want to come back? I said, yes. Well, it's going to be a little bit of it's the downgrade. I says, I'll take the downgrade. The pay difference wasn't that bad.
Mm-hmm.
So came back to DC and I worked for the Navy's medical facilities office. So, and that was excellent. But then about 3 months later, because I was still applying for other jobs, and then one morning I get a phone call. I recognized the number. Oh, it's from Corps headquarters. Who's calling me? Turns out it was the senior civilian at headquarters. And of course, I immediately go, yes, sir. And
Yeah.
decided, oh, and I'm thinking, oh God, did I do something that they're calling me? Why is the senior civilian calling me up? He says, oh, Ed, you put in for this position. I says, oh, yes, sir, I did. Well, let me tell you what the job really is about. It's be my executive assistant. Are you interested? I says, when can I start, sir? And I got my promotion back, but it was a case of getting out of project and program management, and all of a sudden now tailing one of the most senior officials in the Department of Defense, which if you've ever seen a general or an admiral, they usually have some young officer that's trailing them basically doing stuff. Well, I was the equivalent for Bill Brown to do that. And it was a great experience because then you got to see the entire organization and see what they do. And you get to be in the room where you're talking to senior officials in that. Doing that, I lost my fear of generals, senior executives, and political appointees. But did that for
Yeah,
a
once
couple
you're
of
in the
years.
room with them all the time.
Uh, as Bill told me, 90% of the time, where I go, you go. And of course, the fact is, you get in the room and then we'd have a meeting. And when they went away, Bill closes the door and basically says, okay, Ed, what do you think? And you very quickly realize when they say, what do you think? He means, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say it's probably a good reason the door is closed because we probably said a few things about folks that should never go outside the door. But as a case, you be very candid in terms of, hey, is this person being truthful or are they just blowing smoke? And also the fact is I had to oversee preparing briefings that went up to Capitol Hill, and I'd get some briefings and I'd look at it and it would be all engineerese. I just says, oh God. And I'd have to go back and say, guys, turn it into plain English.
Yeah.
Congressional staffers, they are not engineers, they're not architects. And the only three questions they have is, why are you here? What are you proposing? And what do you need from my boss? And you have to basically and if you can't make those points very succinctly, they'll be very polite. They'll just stare. And then the minute you walk out the door, your presentation goes into the wastebasket. So that was really a learning and basically in terms of how to present things and also how things on high really start working. And of course, it got a lot of face time with the commander of the Corps of Engineers too. But so after a couple of years, then they had to find a place for me to go, and I ended up in what we then called installation support. So I was doing program management for stuff, but I was also running the career program for 15,000 engineers, architects, and scientists across the Army. So a lovely little collateral duty, which actually was a lot of fun. Got to really help folks in terms of how you do development, their professional development. I can tell you, got a lot of folks that back then who are now in senior positions with the Corps and elsewhere in the Army. So that is a personal accomplishment that I feel strongly about. Then eventually I got promoted to my current job about 10 years ago, and it's been pretty adventuresome, especially the last couple of years because we are growing our programs. In fact, I just mentioned to my boss today that for the system that we use to develop military construction documents, we just got another major customer, and they're throwing, let's just say, a good deal of money at us. And he basically says, we need to come up with a business plan. You've got a little enterprise going. I says, yes, I do. So Well, we have this
Yeah.
particular capability. We've got over 20 agencies using it. So it is a big deal. The fact is that we have a product which agencies want to use, and they don't barter on the price. They say, okay, it's worth the investment. So nice to be able
Yeah,
to
make
have
it work.
clients. Yeah, it's nice to have clients that don't argue about fees.
Yeah. Now,
So
I know a lot of these transitions you mentioned were all from like phone calls more than probably applying.
uh,
Is
most of them
that
were.
more how the
It
federal
depends.
government works?
No, there are. You still have to apply. Like for example, when I got the job at Aberdeen, I mean, I basically talked to my boss before I formally applied for the job. But and there are ways they can basically, in terms of select. I mean, they could shorten the application period. They can limit the area consideration, and I mean, there are ways to do it. I mean, you still have to basically go through the motions. But
Hmm.
now, I mean, like for example, then when I went back and was executive assistant, the job that probably was assistant director, and I just said, well, okay, I'll take a shot. It didn't really say what the real duties were, but I'm pretty sure Bill knew me. He pulled my name out and said, hey, I want Ed. So, and if the senior civilian at headquarters says they want somebody, it's yes. Sounds like
Yes,
it
and go.
sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Now, what do you find is the biggest challenge working on the facilities side, but also on the federal government facilities?
The biggest challenge is always dealing with the bureaucracy. It's a case of that you sort of okay, you have rules and regulations. Some of them do actually make sense because we are responsible for taxpayer dollars. But on the other hand, sometimes we put internal processes in that we tend to be our own worst enemy sometimes in terms of we put so many processes in. It may be for a good reason, but you just all of a sudden think, excuse me. So, but the challenge, it's actually opportunities, is that the fact is not everything is always black and white. You always look for the gray areas where you can actually affect. And it's the gray areas that you can usually take the opportunity to really instigate change. I will give you an example, and it goes back to my medical facility days. Uh, I was doing a project out in California for the Food and Drug Administration. They wanted a regional laboratory and office. And one of the things they wanted to do was to have an office concept where the analytical lab folks could work easily with the investigators and team up if there was a problem. Say, for example, there's a bad strawberry thing going on,
Hmm.
and they wanted to set up a strawberry team. Well, we worked with the AE, and it was a ZGF out of their Los Angeles office, really signature firm. Went through the concept, and then we got to, in terms of looking at the codes. Code basically says 2 hours solid separation between a lab function and an admin function. And I says, well, that's not going to work. So I then decided to start looking through the NFPA standards, fire protection codes, and they have a code for laboratories. And I looked through there, and they said if you use active protection, you could actually go to a 45-minute separation. Now, of course, as you know, a 2-minute wall and a 45-minute wall are two entirely different objects. And we said,
Yep.
ooh. So because of the fact that the federal government bought the property, so it was titled to the U.S. government, and because it was not a military project, I had to tell folks we're using commercial standards, and my team flipped out and says, "You're what?" Yeah, we're going to do what the rest of the real world does. We're going to use the building codes. But I told them because of the fact is we should use NFPA 45 as the basis of your design. And the architect says, you can do that? Of course we can do that. And they went ahead and did that. And design came out. It's a signature project. Agency was very happy with it. And before it went to construction, we went to the fire marshals because it sat on the line between Newport Beach and Irvine, California. We decided to have both fire marshals take a look at it. And they looked through and they said NFP 45. They did their calculations. They took a look and said, well, hey, this will work. So the project got built. Within 6 months after completion, the agency moved in and started using it, and they loved the building. It functioned the way that we wanted it to function. The AE got a lot of inquiries from other companies saying, hey, can we have something like this? So they generated work. And then about 3-4 years later, I met up with the design team at a different function. We went out to dinner, and they told me, oh, by the way, they changed the building code. And I says, you mean my crazy stunt? I got a code change? Darn! So, needless to say, that was part of my FAIA application.
Before we jump into the FAIA questions I have, when you mentioned you're going to build this with the commercial standards, I know I have not done government work or military work in my background. What does that mean in terms of what construction you can do at different grades?
There are the military, obviously, they do. No, the federal government does have a building code. It's in the Unified Facility Criteria section. If you go to the whole building design guide, you can find all the UFCs, and a lot of that deals with the standards which are used not just with DoD, but with all other federal agencies. And that is generally the standard. In this particular case, because we bought the property and all that, and there was really no, at the time, there really was no UFC. So the agencies said, okay, let's use your best judgment. And we decided, okay, since at that time, the UBC controlled construction out in California, we decided, okay, we'll use UBC. Thankfully, this is before Title 24, so we didn't have all the energy stuff that you now have to go through in California. But it's actually now an epilogue is that they're now doing some retrofitting on that facility to meet Title 24 standards.
Naturally.
Of course. But
yeah,
it is a challenge because sometimes you have to figure out what the appropriate standard is. In this case, of course, obviously we had gotten the property from the University of California, Irvine. They gave us a very nice deal on the property. But at that point, we pretty much had free reign. Now, that is not always the case. Like, for example, if you build within the District of Columbia or for the National Capital Region, you have to go to the National Capital Planning Commission for approval for things. And if it's depending on the building, you have the Commission of Fine Arts. I mean, you look at anything that gets built on the mall, I guarantee it goes to Fine Arts for their vetting. But it just depends on the jurisdiction. And I mean, the nice part about military installations is the fact is, okay, you really don't have to deal with the commercial standards at this point. You deal with the military standards. But by the same token, you do have to make them durable and usable facilities because right now the average life of a building on a military installation is about 70 years. That's 70 plus.
Yeah.
So it's it's important. And of course, that building is going to be repurposed several times over its lifetime.
Yeah, making sure it's not only flexible for the future, but at least a design that can withstand time.
Withstand time. And of course, the fact is that, of course, if you're building an earthquake zone, you have to deal with that. And of course, now building for resilience, it just depends where you're located. I mean, if you're in a coastal area, yeah, you have sea level rise, but you could also have hurricanes. If you're in the middle of the country, you have tornadoes, you have drought, you've got, if you're in Oklahoma, you have to deal with the effects of fracking. It's just the fact is, of course, when they say climate change, it's more than just sea level rise. It's a whole host of other things. And I think over the past year or two, I think we've seen just within the U.S. all the different variations of climate change that have happened.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know if it's because I'm in architecture and seeing and talking about all the time that then I just see it even more, or if it's just even more frequent over the last couple years.
It's
really
what has happened. Yeah, what's happened, of course, is that, and because the Corps of Engineers is FEMA's engineers, say if there's a natural disaster and FEMA gets called in, the Corps is the engineering arm for FEMA. And we have an operations center, and we track both natural and man-made disasters all the time. I mean, in terms of course, hurricane season, of course, is wrapping up. We track all the hurricanes in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. Certainly anything in terms of earthquakes. We had, if you course, earlier this year, of course, we had the effects of all the excess rain out in California or precipitated California, where our drought disappeared in a case of about 3 months. We went from extreme drought to extreme. Oh my God, we got more snow than we can imagine. But and the fact is that it's the incidents of that are more frequent, and the intensity is higher than it has been in the past. I mean, that's what we've been seeing at this point.
Yeah.
And we're pretty savvy on that, but yeah, we see the trends coming, and yeah, I mean, and we can recommend, but like I said, contrary to some people's popular belief, we're not as omnipotent as some folks think we are. Says, hey, the Corps does stuff as we are directed and we are funded to do.
Mm-hmm.
We have a $90 billion workload, but I can tell you, virtually all of it is customer funded.
Interesting. Do you have any advice for any, I guess probably a two-part question, advice for anybody interested in working within the federal government as an architect or engineer, or if there's a particular personality type or strength that would lend to successful career on the federal government side?
Tough question. I think the fact is, at this point, you have to be willing to serve. Face it, if you want to make a ton of money, federal government, any level of government is not where you want to work. I think you also have to be able to show patience, because obviously things don't always get done at warp speed. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they're not. Also understand process. But I would say that you have to understand it even if you're practicing in the private sector, because, hey, you have to go through, there are steps you have to go through to get a building built. So, and in that regard, it's not all that different. I've talked to my private sector counterparts, and I basically say the main difference between what I do and what you do is that the private sector is profit driven, the public sector is mission driven, where we have a direction that we get from our customers, from the Pentagon, from the White House, from Congress, and they all love to tell us what to do. And hopefully give us money to do it. Most times they do. But I think the fact is that, but you also have to look is that there are tremendous opportunities. I mean, you get to deal with programs of national significance. Certainly the Corps, we're a worldwide organization, so you have the opportunities to work overseas. I mean, a lot of stuff in Europe, in Asia. We also do, as I said, we're currently active in about 35 countries, but we touch down on stuff in like over 100. So we get to do work which, frankly, in a lot of cases, it just isn't done in the private sector. It's either too hard to do, or folks just say, no, really not interested. But it's you get to do a lot of interesting stuff, and that has been what has been key for my career. Is the fact is I've had opportunities to do various projects and programs. I've been able to. Certainly, I've been traveling all around the country. There's very little of the U.S. I have not seen yet. I not that much overseas, but will. Who knows? I may still have an opportunity to do that at this point. But
You never know where your career will take you.
no, and I think the fact is, there's an analogy that one of our former chiefs of engineers used when somebody said, "Well, General, how did you become chief?" Well, it's sort of like walking down a corridor with a bunch of doors, And all of a sudden, this door opens, and you go through it, and voila. And I would say basically the fact is that take advantage of opportunities that come. If you're a student, if there's a nearby, what is not just the Corps, but any federal agency, they may very well have intern programs or summer hires. Take advantage of those so at least you can get a flavor of what they do. I'm going to give a quick commercial for the Society of American Military Engineers. Uh, the local posts around the country, most of them, including DC, they do have scholarship programs. And we also work with the private sector to create opportunities for summer. And again, it's something that is being able to do something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. And what's the scholarships going towards college or
Yes.
for like
Yes.
summer stipend?
They're pretty much like the DC Post. It's for college tuition at this point. We currently have, I believe active. We have about 5 or 6 students within the DC Post who have scholarships to various schools. There's a couple out at Catholic University of America, which is not far away from my office. In fact, I'm going to speak to one of their civil engineer classes next week about trying to reestablish a student post out at Catholic University. Also, DC Post has a mentoring program, and I volunteered. There was a young woman architect at Howard. We just met last month for coffee and just chatted about how she grew out her career. Of course, I found out that 2 of her professors are FAIA peers of mine, so I'll just, of course, they will say, "Oh, Professor so-so." "Oh, Ronnie," or "Nia." And of course, he's, "Oh, Professor." Okay, you call him Professor. I call them on their personal basis.
Yeah.
Mainly because both of them I help coach through the fellows program with the DC chapter.
Yeah. So let's dive into the fellow program.
Oh yes.
So I know a lot of students in college, they kind of get AIA because of AIAS, but soon as you throw fellow out, they get kind of confused on what that means, what the process is. And I know we've even talked about there's multiple categories of fellow. Can you kind of describe your story
All
and a
right.
little bit about it?
I can do that. Well, first of all, if somebody at my graduations had said I would be a fellow in AIA, I would have probably asked, "What did you smoke last night?" But seriously, I think because my career was so varied, I knew it was there, but it wasn't really something I thought about. I think it took until about 5 years of poking from colleagues who were fellows, including a couple chancellors of the College of Fellows, basically said, "Okay, I get the hint now." And so, of course, started looking into that, and I looked at the body of my work. Says, "Well, I might be able to do this." Now, when you apply for fellow, if you go to the fellows page, they now have 6 objects that you can be elevated to. Now, let's see. First one is design. Of course, that's self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
Second one is practice, and there's subdivisions in that with dealing with your technology or management or what have you. Third one is service to the institute. Say, for example, you were extremely active within AIA and you've had leadership positions and that sort of stuff. Fourth one is service to service to people, which includes government, and that's the category, and that's the object that I was elevated within. The fifth one is sort of a catch-all. It's sort of a miscellaneous that odds and sods, as I say, that doesn't fit in any other category. And then they separated a new one that started a year ago, which now is education, because a lot of the education stuff was coming up through Object 2. And I think there was just so many people there that, okay, we're just going to create a separate object. And so when you do as fellow, you will pick one of those objects that you want to be elevated in. Now, at least with the DC chapter, when you go through our coaching program, I mean, and everybody there is a fellow, so I mean they all are looking, but they will look at your work with a very critical eye, and they'll say, "Oh, you said object 4, maybe you should be object 2, or what have you." And that's stuff you need to think about.
When you say
Uh,
coaching, are they like training you or reviewing
it's sort of a little
you?
bit of both.
Okay.
Very short. In DC, we have one of the best programs to prepare candidates for fellow. You have to do like a 5-page summary of your work, and your resume is considered by the fellows committee within the DC chapter, and they can make the initial determination of whether you qualify for the program or not. And I will tell you, not everybody always gets in. Uh, but we go through, and then it's a 6-month program, or as some of us affectionately refer to it as boot camp, because you have a schedule, you have deliverables, you have presentations, and the nice part is that we'll break up and we'll move you around to the different fellows so you get various perspectives. But I will tell you, the hardest jury you will ever go through is the first time you have to put your 35-word statement up on the wall, and you have 30-some people in the room can all throw stuff at it or will question it. If you thought your college juries were tough, this is a real tough one. And there's not even a building involved. It's
It's just
a
words.
couple of sentences. Yes. But those words are important because it serves as the basis of why you want to be elevated, and it's also the hook to get the jury interested. Okay, what is this person saying that they want to do? And it is something you basically have to create a storyline. I mean, that's the statement is the basis of your storyline, and it says what are the major points of how you get elevated, and then of course it's your work, it's your involvement with AIA, it's any publications, it's any speaking stuff. That all has to be accounted for, and then of course you have to put your exhibits, which okay, then you get to pull out the pictures and the pretty drawings and that sort of stuff. But I tell folks it's both a writing exercise and a design exercise, because hey, we're visual critters, so yes, we want it to look nice, and it reads well. But also the fact is, as they say, words matter, and you really have to go through the words. And especially for us government types, we have to stay away from acronym heaven and spell things
Hmm.
out, because another thing you have to consider is that you have no friends on the jury and they have no clue what you do. So you have to basically, I won't say dumb it down, but you basically have to make it very clear that what you do not assume that they know all the acronyms. I mean, and certainly the military has its own set of acronyms unto itself. So that was one of the challenges I went through. And then, of course, you also have to get 7 letters of recommendation. And but then you basically you beat yourself over your head for 6 months trying to craft it all right, take all the input, figure out, okay, what's actually good, what's okay, and then there's some stuff you'll get, okay, appreciate your thoughts, thank you, because at the end of the day, it's still your submission. It has to be you. It has to be your voice. And
Yeah.
that's the hardest part. And the jury, of course, the fun part is now, and I recognize some of my peers who are now sitting on the fellows jury, and it's just the case is that, hey, we've all been through this. We all we can pretty much figure out what when there are true voices and when something's coming out that either came out of the marketing department or just does not read well at this point. Uh, and I will tell you, last year the jury was especially tough because the percentage of submissions that were elevated to fellow was like only a third. It normally had been about 40%, but last year was like only 33%. So last year was an especially tough lift for folks.
Now, is there like a quantity they look for, or is it just
No, it
based
is not.
on?
There is no quotas. I mean, that's always been a thing. Says, oh, no, there are no quotas. It's strictly based on the quality of the submission. What happens is that when they get, I mean, and they're going through this now, you get the number of submissions. AIA makes sure, okay, did you at least follow the requirements of what had to be submitted? Are you eligible? Did you, are you current on your licensure and on your continuing education? Once they do that, they split the big pile into 7 smaller piles. Each of the jurors gets their pile, and they then spend a couple of months because the assigned juror will read their assigned submissions cover to cover, and they will be the ones that present when the jury convenes in late January, early February. And they will present, they'll say, okay, this is Ed Gauvreau, he's going to object 4, these are the strengths that I see, these are areas that we need to talk about. And they all look at stuff, and yeah, they will discuss in terms of, hey, has he really raised the bar for the profession? Is it just his day job, or did he do go above and beyond the day job? Because there are folks that will come through and says, well, isn't that what you're supposed to be doing? How did you really raise the bar? I mean, I will use a takeoff of what Justice Douglas said years ago regarding pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think a similar thing goes with architects. I can't describe a successful fellows proposal, but I know it when I see it. And pretty much,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can even see when we do the last round of reviews before we submit the DC candidates in, I usually at that point can pretty much have a pretty good idea. Okay, these are the shoe-ins. These are the ones that are pretty close. And these are the ones, okay, we're going to send them through, but I don't think they're going to make it. And surprisingly, I've been pretty accurate on it for the last several years when I've done that. Now, this year I did not participate because I was sponsoring a candidate from New York, and I wanted to concentrate all my efforts on getting her through the process. But
now, trying to remember what I was going to ask. For the people who don't get fellow, do they get feedback on
yes,
like why?
Yes, they will get they will get feedback in terms of how the strength of your sponsor letter, in terms of your overall presentation, areas which they thought that could use improvements, or things that things that were strong, things that were not strong. It doesn't really get down to the nuts and bolts, but at least it gives you an idea.
Yeah.
Now, if you do not get in the first time, you are allowed to reapply a second and a third year. But if after 3 consecutive attempts you do not make fellow, you then have to sit out a year and then start the cycle over again. And
Gotcha.
And like I said, we've had candidates we've had a couple of candidates from DC who stuck through third time. They got through on the third time. And I think they're both still smiling at this point. So
now, you speak about fellow like it's a smaller
it is.
camaraderie. Like, can you speak about that?
Sure. I always maintain being the College of Fellows is the fraternity I never got to join in college. But it's only 3% of all AIA members that are in the College of Fellows. It is very much, these are folks who, in various aspects of the profession, have raised the bar. Now, of course, when I got in, I just said, oh my God, but when you had investiture, there's a luncheon before that where everybody gets in there and you start talking to everybody and you think, and they say, well, this is what I did for it. Oh, that's interesting. And you all of a sudden that everybody does different stuff. And you find those stuff that is really intriguing. The fact is that the great diversity of folks, even like within particular objects, that you just say, whoa, that's interesting. We need to talk later. And yeah, I have established some very good friendships, both within my fellows class, but also with other fellows. I'll tell you a true story. About a year after I made fellow, one of our district commanders in Japan, who graduated from the University of Miami with his architecture degree, he was trying to get folks from Miami to come out and be like summer students or even to get full-time employment. He's calling his old professors and he's not getting the time of day out of them. He says, Ed, I'm not getting anywhere. He says, Tom, let me take a shot at it. Well, it turns out Elizabeth Platter Zyberk, who had been the dean when Tom was there, she had stepped down as dean but was still on the faculty, and I had met her briefly a couple of times. So I craft an email to Liz and say, we have a common friend in Tom Farrell, and I described the situation and said, hey, could you possibly help? A day later, I get an email back from Liz saying, Ed, got your email. We're willing to help. We could do this. And like within a week, Tom's getting inundated from references. What could we do? What can we do to help you? 3 months later, he's in DC for a meeting, and he says, Ed, what the heck happened? All this stuff happened. I says, Tom, there are times in life where getting an F is a good thing. But it just shows the fact is that it's not 6 degrees of separation within the fellows community. It's more like 1 to 2 degrees of separation in terms of being able to find folks who do stuff. And I will say that if you talk to AIA National, if you're FAIA, they tend to return your messages a lot faster.
And you speak about like your FAIA class and like a fraternity. Are you closer with the people of your class, or does it become more of the holistic, bigger community?
It's more holistic at this point. I will. So simply the fact is that I've met fellows who have been fellows for a long time, and then of course some of the more recent fellows is that we've had some communications. I think the fact is that all of a sudden you get the F, and of course it's not just the fact is that it's not just for what you've accomplished, it's also for what you start giving back to the larger institute at this point. I take that pretty seriously. The fact that I've been extremely fortunate to actually have done a body of work that my peers consider worthy, and so it's like I said, it's an honor I never really expected to get, but the fact that I've received that, I will certainly embrace it for everything that it's worth, both the personal accomplishment, but also the fact is that it's called start bringing the next generation up with you. Right now, in fact, I am mentoring a young female architect in DC, works for a construction company, very bright. She is the current chair of the Project Delivery Knowledge Community, and I just got some late breaking news. She had asked to put in for an at-large position on Strategic Council, and she just found out this afternoon that she is now a member of the AIA Strategic Council.
That's awesome.
Yep. So, and Laura, a couple years ago, says, I want to go for fellow. I says, and how long have you been a full member? Just over 2 years. I says, well, you got 8 years before you're eligible, but and we meet on a regular basis, and every time we bring up a fellows conversation in terms of, okay, what have you done recently? Okay, I hope you have. She has a file where I keep reminding her where if you made a presentation or there's an award or you got another position, it goes into your file so that when the time comes when you're eligible, you have all that material handy. We don't have to go looking for it, and we can start building your case.
Yeah,
And
I even give that advice for people as they work for future portfolios or resume work. Like, start just having a folder of work you've done or feedback from clients. Just have that folder so when you need it, you're good.
Yeah. And certainly that's what I'm doing now. I maintain that right now I'm doing the best work in my career at this point. And I have 42 years of federal service. But as I tell folks, they say, Ed, when are you going to retire? I says, why? I'm doing the best work of my career. I got a great staff. I've got great management that supports me. And we're doing some really good, neat stuff. Now, that's not discounting the fact that I also tell folks I am looking for the next adventure. But on the other hand, it has to be a really nice adventure for me to consider where I'm going right now. So, I went down to Arkansas right at the end of September to go look at a project that the Corps is working on. I was more interested in the master plan, but there's some other stuff going. $500 million program. So I take a look at it, it's fine. I sent notes back to headquarters about going on. And then I come in Monday morning, and the first person I run into was General Scott Spellman, who's the chief of engineers, my big boss. And of course I say hi and says, how you doing? He says, well, I just got back from Arkansas. He says, oh, you did? So I sort of had to give him the 1 minute dump, told him all that. And he says, Ed, can you forward all that stuff to me when you get a chance? I says, sir, as soon as I log in, I will forward everything I sent to you. Because obviously, as the chief of engineers, he has to deal with his peers who are beating up on him and says, hey, when are you going to deliver this program?
Yeah.
But, and we got a good bunch at headquarters. It's amazing that even though we do have a lot of high-powered people, it's a relative collegial organization at the headquarters level. I mean, we've had folks come in from other Army organizations, and they're surprised about the fact that we're relatively informal. About the
Mm-hmm.
only people that we say sir or ma'am to are the general officers, because face it, they've earned it. But even our
Mm-hmm.
senior executives, most of them just say, I have a name. Call me by my name. It's not
Yeah.
sir or ma'am. But but we do get formal if we have company coming over. But otherwise, if it's just the family we're relatively informal. But
Yeah.
it's I just think it's a great organization. I mean, I will tell you, and this is something for the folks out there. The Corps of Engineers has 38,000 great people around the world. They are almost, without exception, they are bright, they are intelligent, they are quick, and they are all willing to serve. And I mean, we have folks literally around the world. Like, for example, with the fires out in Hawaii, we have I'd say we have about 3 dozen folks who stood up and said, I want to go. And they're right now out there helping in terms of helping the people out there going through the cleanup and taking care of things out there. So it's an amazing organization. I mean, we're not perfect. Believe me, I know we're not. But I think the fact is that we get to do stuff which nobody else does in the federal government. Nobody.
Yeah. Your boots on the
And
ground
yeah,
and
yeah,
get things
we
done.
literally are boots on the ground to do stuff, and like I said, it's a great experience. And again, for anybody who's looking for working in government at all levels, you have the opportunity to basically affect your whole community. It's not just a building. You get to affect your entire community. And in our cases, we're dealing with large military installations, but even the communities outside those installations, we affect. And it's get a lot of satisfaction out of it.
Yeah. Has there been any significant mentors along the way that's influenced you?
It took a while to do that because, especially at a lot of installations, it's hard to find folks. But I will say, I will give at least a little bit. Jim Allred, who was my boss for the medical facilities office and the only other Corps architect to ever make fellow, he was certainly he was sort of help in that. Bill Brown, who was my boss when I came back to the Corps, and he's honorary AIA. He We had a lot of great conversations in terms of professional development and just family and that. Also got to learn about all the black fraternities and sororities, so I have a fairly working knowledge of those. Uh, and I have some other folks at this point. It's just that would be the right recommendation. Really, even in government, find a mentor, and it doesn't have to be within your agency. It can be somebody else, somebody you trust. I mean, Laura and I have a mentor-mentee relationship, and hey, I work for the Corps of Engineers. She works for Mortensen, and not to mention there's about a 30-year age difference. But by the same token, it's it's a case that we just hit it off, and it's something that uh, I pass. We trade stuff back and forth, but I also offer suggestions to her in terms of, I mean, she's still relatively early in her career, but gaining she's gaining some experience and some already starting to move up the ladder, and I offer her suggestions in terms of what to do, uh, both in terms of her own within her own firm, but also in terms what are you doing with AIA, what are you doing with DBIA, and that and other things. So we have a pretty good relationship on that, and I think in retrospect, I would have loved to have had something like that. But by the same token, at this point, I just feel the fact is I want to be able to do that for others.
Hmm. Now, if I know I get a lot of questions from young professionals that are starting their career if they should join the AIA. And I know it can be expensive, especially when you're in debt from school and starting to look at paying for the AREs. Do you have any advice for the recent
I would
grads?
recent grads. I mean, certainly if you're an AIAS, that's a starting point. Uh, I would hope the fact is that, and I know some firms do pay your dues, some firms do not. That's a decision. The reason I joined AIA, even though the fact that I have never worked in the private sector, it was the fact is that I just felt important enough is that, hey, if you want to be able to have a seat at the table or able to influence things, you have to be at the table. And I joined. I did not. I was not an AIAS. In fact, I don't think we had an active chapter when I was there. But as soon as I got my license, I joined AIA. Got involved in the Public Architects Committee. Uh, Basically, I've gotten other stuff. I can tell students that if you go to an AIA function and you start hanging around with some off folks there, like I said, you have to watch who you drink with because all of a sudden you might end up on a task force or two. No, but
Yep,
it
that's
is
how you
it
get
isn't
voluntold into doing things.
but it is an opportunity for you to be able to stand up and do stuff and be able to
Hmm.
affect things. I mean, I know, yeah, it's tough these days, and especially with the exams. The good thing is that NCARB has gotten rid of the 10-year limitation on exams, so I think that will be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, that will be a help because I know it's hard. It's hard regardless because you have debt. You're just starting out. You're not getting that, and then of course all of a sudden, hey, you get married. You want to have a family, and that at this point, I mean, that just makes it triply hard at that point. So, um, and I feel for my female colleagues who basically in some ways they have an even steeper hill to climb because I mean you have the family and then of course you have the residual effects of the fact is that, oh geez, it's still a white male club. And I says, well, it's slowly changing at this point. The fact that we will have 3 consecutive female presidents of AIA, I mean that
Hmm.
is something in itself. um, and I've talked to Kim Dowdell a bit. I mean, the fact is that all the factors that she's going to bring in when she assumes the position in December. I mean, between being the 100th president, the first black female, the first millennial to be
Hmm.
AIA president. So uh, it is changing at this point. I think
Yeah.
COVID has certainly done a lot in terms of looking, and firms are starting to relook in terms of their structure. Uh, I know I can tell you several firms right now who never really have had, they do not set up a traditional studio. They've always been virtual. Uh, if you talk to Leah Bayer of Four Architects out in the West Coast,
Hmm.
she set up when she started the firm. She did not, hey, she wanted to be able to bring folks in, but did not want to be tied to an office. So she set up the processes and the software to make networking easy. And they focused on multifamily housing and they've been extremely successful. So,
Yeah,
and
I've
I've talked
seen
to,
her speak a couple times, and
yeah,
it's
she's
been
awesome.
great.
Yeah. And we've talked a couple times and I've already told Leah, says, Leah, when you're ready to go for fellow, let me know. I will write a letter for you.
Yeah. And I was at the AIA Women's Leadership Summit in Boston this year, and I got to see the next 3 AIA presidents all staying
Yep.
together, and they all be female. And as a young professional, it's just amazing to see that growth and change within the AIA. Firms, it's kind of depends on the structure
Well,
to what that changes, but seeing that in terms of within the AIA is just, it took my breath away, like
it
being in that
is.
room and
It's
seeing them.
always a tremendous change at this point. And if you look at the AIA National Senior Staff now, the difference from 5 years ago to now is just it's almost a complete change at this point. Uh, I will say I am sure that there are some traditionalists out there who they're probably very quietly grinding their teeth. And I will say the fact is that it's great that we are starting to get more women involved and in leadership positions, both in the institute but also within firms. That's the next thing, particularly the larger
Hmm.
firms. We want to be able to see the fact is that it's great. I mean, like Allison Steele, who's the DC chapter, she's now the president of Quinn Evans. Teresa Shields, who's one of the main principals for Gensler's DC office, both of whom I helped coach up to fellow. I think the fact is there's still a long ways to go. Certainly in terms of minority representation, I mean, we still have a very long ways to go in that. It will evolve. The only concern I have, and I'll throw a little fly in the ointment, is the fact is I just want to make sure that while we work on diversifying what architects look like, that we remember that architects still design buildings. I mean, at the end of the day,
Hmm.
regardless of who you are, you're being retained to basically provide spaces and places. That's
Yep.
what we're trying to do in life at this point. And I did mention to Britt Lindbergh, I said, in terms of, it's great that the Women's Leadership Conference is there, it's well attended and all that. I just says, okay, when are we going to get a few more guys there? So,
Yeah.
and I've asked them, take a look in terms of, you might want to look at how you market it in order to make it at least that more men would want to attend at this point. I almost did this year, but I think I had some conflicts. I couldn't do it. So, but
Yeah, I
I
know there was a
certainly,
few, but it's a
uh,
lot. Like I like attending NOMA events
mm,
because even though I am male female, more of a minority, I don't feel as much of a minority as other races. And being in a
yeah,
room where I am then a minority within that space, it makes me be in their shoes
yeah,
as little as I can. But it's the same
and I understand.
concept.
Yeah, and I certainly with Noma, I will tell you my experience the first trip I went with Bill was to the Blacks in Government Conference in Los Angeles. We get out, he's the keynote speaker. We go into the convention center, into the main hall. There's probably like over 1,000 people in the hall. And of course, I'm curious stuff. And as I'm going up the aisle, I just see everybody smiling. And it came to the fact, it was not lost on me. The senior African American engineer in the Department of Defense is addressing the Blacks in Government Conference, and who's carrying his bag? And the irony was not lost on anybody in the room, including me.
Yep.
So, but no, and we had dinner that night, and I basically said, "Look, Bill, I grew up in Detroit. I ran, so I understand, but today was really the first time that I think I got to be in your shoes a little bit.
Yeah.
So being the only one in the room, but it's
Yeah.
so yeah. I think it's the fact that I think it's getting there, but like I said, it's a crawl, walk, run thing. We're not going to get there as quickly as we would like, but I think the fact is we've come a long ways just in the last decade or so at this point. I mean, I will tell you, my graduating class at Notre Dame, I think we had 60 some folks, and we only had like 6 women. Now most of the
Hmm.
classes there are over 50% women,
Yeah.
but
And
we're
then it's just
still,
seeing what happens in the industry and where
well,
things
yeah,
change.
yeah.
And
And the important part is, okay, the over 50% at the schools. Now let's see what happens as you go into the work world at this point. And that's those statistics. Yeah, there's still a long ways to go in there, particularly at senior levels. But
yeah.
I will tell you, my immediate boss may be a white male, but my next 2 level bosses above me are both white females. One's a PhD engineer, the other's a 2-star general.
I don't know
So,
what I'd be more afraid of.
actually,
PhDs,
neither.
I'll get outsmart, then the general is just like, whoa.
Uh, well, I know General Colleton pretty well. I knew her when she was a lieutenant colonel. So I know, and she's actually an architect by education. She went to RPI.
Mhm.
I asked her one time, why didn't you pursue registrations? Well, blowing up things doesn't really work well for NCARB. I says, yeah, you're right. They probably wouldn't accept that very well. So it's not really good experience that they'll accept. But at least she understands architects and architecture. So
Yeah, knows how to take stuff down.
yeah, oh yeah, she does. Oh yeah, and actually build some stuff back up too. So
Yeah.
she's got she has responsibility for all our stuff at military installations, but also all our international work. So
Wow.
she has a pretty big portfolio to deal with.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Her portfolio is probably around the order of about 25 to $30 billion worth of stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's even hard. Even my larger scale projects, it's dollar amounts that like I'm just not used to handling
Well,
because
well, the year after I made fellow, I was at the AIA convention in New York. I was at a party. I was talking to R.K. Stewart, former national president, and we know each other. And R.K. says, "So Ed, what are you up to?" And I was having to be the acting division chief at the time, so I very casually told him, "Oh, I'm running a $6 billion program."
Mhm.
After he scraped his jaw off the floor, I says, "All right, I'll give you the 30-second commercial about what I do for a living." And so I
Yeah.
explained what we were up to, and he says, "Wow, that's something." I says, "Yeah, my portfolio is a lot different than 99% of the other folks here at the convention. I mean, it's only the other public architects who like work for like major federal agencies or even some like the large cities like New York City. Yeah, you do some pretty big stuff in New York, but
Yeah.
yeah, there aren't that many people there at the convention who would be able to say we could probably put everybody in one small room and be able to do that." So, but
Yeah.
otherwise, I would just say it's been an interesting ride at this point, and I don't think it's over yet. I'm not I'm not ready to park things in the garage yet. Let's put it that way.
Still having fun.
Yep, you got it. And I think that's the important part of the fact is, and I mean, architects. I mean, we as long as we're interested, we will keep going until the end. I mean, how many, how many big name architects basically have worked up almost all the way up till the last day at this point. So,
Yeah.
but
It's more of a shock when people retire.
well, yeah. I mean, like for example, Wright, of course, worked up until about the last month of his life. Bill Helmuth, who passed away last year, is the head of art of HOK. Now, he had not been well for several months, but he said, but he had already set the transition plan. So when he passed, HOK plugged in the transition plan, and they have transitioned to their new level of leadership.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, the fact is that you want to work, but at the same point, you have to be ready. The fact is, hey, you have to pass the baton at some point. So it's just a case of you prefer to be able to do it while you're still vertical. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. And then I had one last question for you.
Sure.
Do you have any advice for young professionals just starting their career?
Be open to the possibilities. That is, I will tell you, in school, they do not to indict all the educational folks, but by the same point, you don't necessarily see the variety of options that you can have out there. I mean, they all figure, oh, you're going to do design. Well, everybody, I mean, even in school, there'll be folks who design and says, I really don't like design. I'd rather do construction. Or, hey, I really into computer stuff at this point. Uh, Certainly, one of the things during one of the recessions back in the 2000s that we lost a lot of architects that went into various fields because of their background with both CAD and, of course, eventually with 3D stuff. Hey, they went into other stuff and they found fulfillment and, frankly, made more money. Uh, but I think the fact is that whether I got examples out of my class, we have folks that went into development. Got folks that were into healthcare. We have others that I mean, some that served in the military, did stuff across their careers, of doing other stuff now. A couple of examples just within the SAME community. Guy that was 5 years behind me got told, you should probably do something else besides architecture. Well, he did his time in the Air Force, then worked on Capitol Hill for a Senate committee. Eventually, he was appointed to be the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Installations. back in the prior administration, which basically means, yeah, but he thought like an architect, still does. I have another guy who's a few years behind me, served in the Army, was head of the Army's Health Facilities Planning Agency, which basically got to plan medical facilities. Well, he did his time, retired as a full colonel. Less than a month later, he's wearing a gray suit, and he's now the head of the Department of Veterans Affairs office that oversees building of VA hospitals around the country. And I think the fact is that you just to say, be open to options. It may not be the thing that you originally were thinking about, but you can certainly find a niche somewhere with your education to be able to do stuff. And I mean, whether it's in business, whether it's in law, whether it's engineering, whether it's a whole different allied field, the options of architecture education, at least you get the ability to think a bit outside the box. And that is something I think we can, as I say, the engineers like to go from A to Z, and they'll go through each letter. Architects will probably do loops around, says, well, wait a minute, L, no, we need to go back and do this, or we're going to go off this way. So, and that's the ability that we have. We can say, hey, it's not always a linear solution. It sometimes has to be, you have to be circular, or even sometimes very obtuse. But
yeah. In the education side, they're more trying to explain the licensure process, and that's fairly straight. But if you either aren't going to go through that process, or you hit the get licensed, and then you're like, well, now what? What do I do? How?
Oh, yeah. I had a guy a year behind me. He told me he passed the exam, went to his boss and said, hey, I passed my exam. And his boss said, so what? You're the same person that was before the exam. Needless to say, he went and got a job elsewhere. But
Yeah.
I think the fact is that, yeah, I mean, I would hope, I mean, I need to get back to Notre Dame. I do owe the dean there a visit, but I would also say, hey, I want to talk to the students and basically just say, hey, yes, I know what Notre Dame's program goes through, but hey, you have options out there. It's not everybody is going to do neoclassical design. I mean, there's just not that. I mean, there's just not many stuff. And the fact is, you might get out and 5 years later, you're going to say, this is not what I want to do. And that's the whole thing, is that if you don't like what you're doing, look at other options. They are out there. And sometimes you have to create your own.
Yeah. And you never know where opportunities will take you. I can guarantee you, even last year, I did not think I would be in this position right now talking to you, let alone graduating and having any idea where I was going to go with my career and helping other professionals.
Well, yeah. And I think there's a lot of stuff. I mean, right now I'm talking to a young woman out of Sydney, Australia. She's not an architect, but she writes for architects, like doing their website and all their marketing stuff and messaging.
Is that Nikita? Am I
Nikita,
saying her
yes.
name right?
Nikita Morell, yes. Yeah. In fact, we even had a Teams call. Of course, 14 time zones, you have to figure a good time when we can both talk.
Yeah,
But,
and without being super tired.
yeah, well, by the same point, I mean, I just by the fact that, Nikita, 10 years ago, we probably couldn't even be doing this right now. The technology wasn't allowed that we could basically we could see each other on the screen from 10,000 miles away. But I actually helped her write her proposal for a session at convention next year. We're hoping we can get it through. So it's just, yeah, I mean, she's very talented. I mean, it's certainly, she's definitely quirky, but by the same token, she has very great points. And I asked her, well, who are all your clients? I mean, you're based in Sydney. And she says, oh, most of my clients are in the US. Says, okay. Obviously, what you're pushing, it resounds with a lot of folks. But no, we've been in contact. And like I said, I'm hoping we get her into conventions. I do want to meet her in person. She is just, she's a joy to talk to.
Yeah, definitely. And I know I'm going to be planning around DC next year. So
well,
hopefully
let me know
she's
when
there. I'd love to meet her.
Yeah. And hey, you're going to be in town. Let me know.
Will do. But I wanted to thank you, Ed, again for coming on my YouTube channel. If anybody is intrigued with this conversation or wants to learn more, is there a good way to get a hold of you?
You have my email address, correct? That's probably the
Yep.
best way to do that. So,
All right. I can put your email below. I know I reached out to you on LinkedIn, so I will also put your LinkedIn on there as well.
but
So
my LinkedIn page will work, but also my personal email address, which is 6of157@gmail.com.
will do. So if you guys have any questions at all working in the federal government, the FAA process, or if you're in DC and just want to get a coffee, I'm sure Ed will be more than
Yep.
happy to meet up with you.
The coffee shops are all operational. There are 4 of them within walking distance of my office.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Check out the description below for any resources, links, and contact information we discussed. Did you like the conversation today? Is there something you'd like to know more about or a topic I should cover? Leave me a comment below and I will see what I can do to best answer your questions. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. It does really help others be able to find this resource to have larger conversations. So leave me a comment and subscribe. I really appreciate your support.